For this week, I chose titles based on typography, where the main element of the cover is actually text instead of a picture or models or any kind of other artwork. The first title that I chose is Witches Get Stitches by Juliet Cross. The second one is To Sir with Love by Lauren Lane. And the third one is Men Are Frogs by Sarana DeWild. So the first title is Witches Get Stitches by Juliet Cross. First of all, I really enjoyed reading this book. The main plot and the secondary plot were very simple, but the delivery was great. And it didn't really complicate things much, so I really enjoyed how the story flowed. And although there were a lot of characters involved in the story, because as I understand it, this is part of a series. This is the first book that I've read of Cross's, but as I understand it, this is the third book in her series. Surrounding this one family of magical beings. I really like how each character was involved with a certain depth. Like, I didn't have any problems identifying which was which. I didn't really have any problem identifying which character was which sister was which. I think there are 6 of them, 7 of them? 6. I think. But throughout the story, you understand which one is which. You don't get them confused because the author wrote them with such distinct personalities, and I appreciated that. I also really appreciated how the author tried to touch on the issue of racial discrimination, even though the representation of it in the book is werewolves. So basically these werewolves are discriminated against based on misconceptions and other things, other factors about them. Basically, they're the minority race in this scenario. And I really liked how it was written and handled throughout the book. It was still a fun read, but I did like that it tried to make a statement in that sense. Cross's pacing makes it so you don't really notice. You just keep on flipping pages. It keeps you interested, which I appreciate. You don't really feel it sort of drag on throughout until you're finished. So it's a quick, fun, light read. I will note, though, that there's no shortage of chemistry between the mains, and there's a lot of explicit intimacy. And if that poses an issue for you, then you might want to skip this one. So the second title is To Sir with Love. This is a recent release, I believe, by the author Lauren Lane. And I really wanted to give Lane another chance because I didn't finish another title of hers, Marriage on Madison Avenue. So I did read this from start to finish. Although I did like the concept in its essence, the sort of believe in magic type rom-com stuff. This book just wasn't for me. The book overall has 288 pages, and I would have thought for such a short story that it would move a little quickly. But what happened is through the chapters, I felt like the story meandered through a lot of non-essential scenarios that didn't really help move the story forward. And so in that sense, it came short for me. It sort of dragged on almost. And the main characters, for me, they didn't really have enough chemistry. I felt almost like the main character was falling in love all by herself after only like a handful of encounters with the love interest. For me, it felt kind of flat. The story, for me, really lacked tension. The main characters, I didn't really feel them attracting each other. Although based on the title, you can kind of assume, I can't imagine how you won't, but you can assume that the love interest turns out to be, Sir, or the person that the protagonist has exchanges with. But it just sort of felt predictable. I did read it after reading the blurb, so I know that it's going to happen, but it it didn't excite me. That's what it comes down to. It didn't really excite me. I just phrased it in so many words. And the Prince Charming was kind of not princely enough. And that's all I will say on the matter. So the third title is Men Are Frogs by Serena de Wilde. I read this a few months back, and it was a really fun read. It was flat in some parts, but I still enjoyed it. One thing I will say though is that throughout parts of the book, some scenarios kind of had me boggled. The author had this tendency of leaning more toward dialogue rather than describing what was really happening. I mean, other devices that would help you imagine what's happening, like descriptions, where they are, what they're doing, action words weren't really there, and it just focused more on conversation. Although the conversations are entertaining, they're definitely witty. I like the banter, and I especially like of course, it based on the title, it's sort of an interpretation of the what the is that story? Princess and the Frog. Jesus Christ. It was an interpretation of Princess and the Frog. The story is an interpretation of Princess and the Frog. And of course it's an insta-love. And there are some aspects of it that you would already expect. But I still was sort of confused. Like the prologue, it had me a bit confused. I couldn't really understand anything because there were a lot of names. There were a lot of conversations that seem to stem toward other books in the series. This book is part of a series, and I think maybe part of that is because I haven't read her other books. But yeah, just the prologue was kind of boggling because there were a lot of fairy names and I didn't know them. And I think they were discussing plot points that happened in other books. So that was a bit confusing. And the pacing of the story sort of took its time, really. And there were scenarios where it was just an explosion of confusing, glittery excitement, and you just as a reader didn't really know what to focus on. It gave me that overwhelmed feeling where I was sort of lost while reading it. But overall, I still sort of enjoyed it. It's definitely not your typical fairy tale. Of course, it's insta-love and there are fairies and magic, all the basics, but there are definitely more mature themes to it, which older readers will appreciate.